Beacon of Light Radio, its hosts, employees, advertisers, and affiliates are not responsible for actions taken by listeners before, during, after, or as a result of listening to broadcasts. All content is strictly for entertainment, educational, or advertising purposes and should not be used to make life decisions or as a substitute for medical, psychiatric, or legal advice or care. The opinions of the host and advertisers are not necessarily the opinions or stance of the station. Listeners agree by hearing or reading this disclaimer to listen at their own risk, be 18 years of age, or have the permission to listen and or call in from a legal guardian, and agree to hold Beacon of Light Radio faultless from any and all repercussions of listening or participating in a broadcast.
Hi everyone and welcome to Over the Rainbow Show with your host Bob Brown on Wednesday the 25th of October on Beacon of Light Radio at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, 12 o'clock Pacific Time and 8 p.m. UK Time. And to all the listeners from around the world, the number to ring the show is 323-902-5497 from the UK, 001 323-902-5497. Now you can go to Beacon of Light Radio chat on Facebook, or you can Skype me at Beacon Light Radio. Well, we're going to have a terrific night tonight. I've got a really, really interesting guest tonight. I haven't spoken to him for about 3 years. Peter Robbins is one of America's most respected UFO investigators, writers. He has been involved in the field for more than 35 years as a researcher, investigator, writer, a lecturer, activist, conference organizer, documentary producer, author, a regular fixture on USA and UK radio. He has written for numerous online and print publications, both here and abroad, and appeared as a guest and has been consultant on to numerous television programs and documentaries. Can we please welcome Peter to the show? Hello, Peter.
Hi, Bob. It's great to be back with you.
My golly, all them years, and you don't look any older.
Yes, right. 3,000 miles and an imagination does a lot to keep me looking the same.
I like it. No, how did you originally become interested in the subject of UFOs?
Oh, boy. Actually, with the return of a memory from childhood of a very overwhelming UFO sighting with my sister Helen that was so overwhelming, intimidating, difficult for me to process as a kid, that I repressed the memory, and it did not come back for over 14 years. When it did, I confirmed the memory with my sister and became quite obsessed with the subject, and here I am, still obsessed with the subject on your show many years later.
And I think it's a great subject as well.
Yeah.
You know, you get some fascinating stories and things from all over the world, you know, and the government to this day keep denying it, and you know, and where do you go from that? When did you decide to become professionally involved in the field, and why?
After discussing the sighting that we had again more than 14 years after the fact, and this is now more than 40 years ago that this conversation took place, my sister told me, but there was more, and went on to describe very clear memories that she had from a childhood UFO-related abduction, a subject that at the time I had never given any thought to, really, and was very shocked to hear about. My sister was a very honest person, very straightforward. We were very close throughout our lives, and I didn't imagine she had any reason to lie to me about that. And again, that her sharing that with me came at the end of our discussing this very undeniable sighting that we had had years before. I don't know if there was a moment where I really decided to become a professional. It just sort of happened. I guess if you're consider being a professional paid to speak, that would have been about 35 years ago that I spoke at my first conference, and a few years before that I started to get articles published.
Is there some primary factor, some drive, what keeps you going?
Yeah, that's a good
in
question.
Your research?
Yeah. Yes. Besides my own innate curiosity, the fact that this is a really important subject, and I don't just mean in terms of are we alone and what's the nature of these other intelligences that seem to come and go, assisted by very high technology with complete impunity. For me, the real importance for us here on Earth, for starters, is if and when that time comes, that it is undeniable that this reality exists, and that the general public is compelled to accept the reality of truly anomalous UFOs. It may have a political consequence which could change a lot on this planet, namely that no matter how divided we are, we human beings, and we certainly are divided overall at this moment in history, we would have to face the fact that we all have a great deal more in common with each other than we do with these other intelligences, good, bad, right, wrong, whatever they mean us, from a very positive assistance to not. And I think that factor is one of the things that keeps governments keeping the lid on this. It could absolutely implode old-fashioned patriotic nationalism in a way that nothing else has, because, again, we might all begin to think of ourselves as human beings first, and Americans or British or, Chinese or Russian or what have you, men, women, Christians, Jews, Muslims, whatever, after the fact. And that would make it harder to control us as populations within national borders. We might actually all want to connect on a deeper level. And again, that takes the power away from those very powerful individuals who have always moved the pieces on the chessboard.
Do you think there'll ever be disclosure?
I think it's inevitable, but I don't think it's going to come in the pat form of the American government certainly saying, oh, we've been lying to you for 70 years, and we now want to let everybody know that we are aware, and that kind of thing. I don't think we'll ever see that happen. They have too much to hide. And the fact is, the cover-up started in America in 1947. And for an American president, for example, to go on television and make such an announcement would mean, by extension, that every president since Harry Truman, whether they be on the left or the right or however you divide things, has been a unindicted co-conspirator and the biggest cover-up in history. And again, party ties are second to covering your own behind when it comes to a moment like that. My dear friend and colleague Richard Dolan has speculated that perhaps the Chinese or the Russians may be the ones who release this information, in part to take away the power that would give the United States if they were the ones to release it, or at least the central attention. Then again, they might want to, at a certain point, after decades of direct and indirect preparation be the ones to say, right, ready or not, here we are. It could be something like a WikiLeaks or a major news dump of photographs and documents that were gilt-edged and were released through a responsible agency or very courageous government. But I think it's going to happen. I just don't know how, and certainly don't know when.
How do you see your role in ufology?
I've been in it one way or another for 40 years and participating at a professional level for most of that time. In assessing the many audiences I've spoken before, I think I do my best work when I take a case and present it in a post-war context, citing actual parts of history that people can relate to, often naming prominent individuals, political and otherwise, where they are part of the story, and make a case aimed at intelligent skeptics rather than true believers. They're interested already, and they're studying on their own as they get more interested. For me, it's more getting someone who's not sure how they feel about the subject, and certainly someone who has grown up in a world atmosphere where ridicule and condescension and, flying saucers and little green men, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, is the cultural norm, even if they feel privately that it is serious. If I can get them into the foyer, if I can get them into the hallway, so to say, and hear one of my talks or read something I've written and say, that was interesting and it was documented, and I feel more comfortable taking the subject a little more seriously now, and I'm more compelled to look at it on my own, and that was well done and interesting, and maybe there is something to this phenomena.
Yeah, why do you think humanity remains so seemingly divided regarding the subject of truly anomalies and UFOs?
Well, a wedge was driven into first the American public, and then in time fairly quickly into the Western world's understanding or take on this subject, that if one studies it, as I have certainly and spoken on it, the birth of the ridicule factor happened in the summer of 1947. We can certainly document that because there was no ridicule factor before that, because there was no so-called modern age of UFO phenomena. But the underpinning for most of us, for most of our parents and even grandparents growing up, is that there's nothing to it. It's all explainable in conventional terms, some of them absolutely outrageous, some of them pseudoscientific, some of them seemingly making sense, and that for an intelligent person, why should I even bother to look into it? Everybody knows it's nonsensical. I'm glad to say, Bob, that from the view I have of speaking regularly at conferences and for groups on the subject, every year I see more and more people who I speak to and actively express it one way or another, who care less and less what other people think about what they think about the subject. And that's major. I don't think I could have said that 10 years ago. Mr. and Mrs. Nice Couple Next Door, who may watch the documentaries and read the books, but wouldn't dare talk about their interest at a dinner party, again, now really could care less. I'm seeing it very strongly in the 50-year-old and up group, and I think that's really healthy. It's changing, but it's changing arithmetically and not geometrically. In order to have those numbers explode, we would need, I think, some kind of event or huge credible information leak or the equivalent.
Yeah, it's same as anything else when you're talking about that subject. Then I talk to a lot of people. A lot of them say, "Yeah, I'm coming round to that now."
Yeah.
I mean, and like you say, years ago, it was load of bunkum. That is, there's no such thing out there.
Yeah.
And I always say, look, until you've seen one yourself, that's it. Everybody's got their own thing about UFOs.
Mm.
Until you see one and get involved, it's a different matter.
Yeah, like any area of specialized study, you know, in conventional areas, the more that you really seriously research the subject, the more court-worthy, credible evidence there is. Any serious student of ufology, you know, is aware of documents that have been properly declassified from both the United Kingdom and the United States, as well as an archive of documents from other countries that some of them are fairly dry and the language kind of governmentese. Other ones shockingly open and definitive in their opinions or conclusions about a percentage of these unidentified flying objects as genuinely unknown, objects of extraordinarily advanced technology that are not ours.
Mm.
Again, it's in the last, say, 20, 25 years, with advances in aerospace research and the wild card factor of, as they say, back engineering, you know, a crashed UFO and applying that technology in our modern age of next to magic technology and growing all the time. There are unidentified flying objects up there that are certainly ours, and I wouldn't want anybody to think otherwise.
Yeah, I'm the same as you as well. But why are they always using these chemtrails to hide things?
That's of course, a very separate subject, and I don't know how or if it relates to the UFO phenomena. Up until a few years ago, I just thought it was kind of paranoid ramblings of folks, but I do take it seriously. I live in a very rural part of the United States in central New York State farm country, and I know vapor trails. We've all seen them since we were kids. The main thing that distinguishes them is they evaporate in anywhere between 10 seconds and a minute, and they're gone. These chemtrails, as they're called, can linger in the sky for hours. And in one case, right over where I live, and I'm sorry I didn't have my camera for it, there were traces in the sky the next morning of ones that I had seen form late the evening before. But whatever they are, I don't think they're good, and I wish we had an answer to them and some responsible people in government engaging us in dialogue about them.
Have you got any advice for those considering conducting their own UFO investigation or research into the field?
Well, if you're like you or me or more people than we know that we can count who at a certain point became interested and then very interested and then did start to look into it, of them, certainly a percentage have gone on to write papers, speak at conferences, engage in dialogue with researchers and witnesses around the world. My basic advice to anyone that's interested in doing that, as somebody that does that and has for a long time, is keep your day job. If you have a career, a way you're earning money, a way you're paying your bills, do not neglect that, no matter how interesting you find this subject. I am one of those crazy people that basically make my living doing this, and there are certainly better ways to pay the bills. It's fascinating, engaging work for sure. I would say, number one, be aware that the internet is a very double-edged sword, and for all of the alleged UFO information and witness accounts and video footage and still photos. A lot of it's specious. And if you look into some of the claims, you'll see that they very quickly fall apart in that there are no real named witnesses. Locations, particular details are often not posted, which should be a sign of suspicion to start with. My advice to people is, old-fashioned as it sounds, begin to build your actual UFO library. There are ever so many UFO books on sale at any given time by current authors, but there's also a world of past published books. And books per se have stood the test of time. They often have annotations, and the facts are confirmed and footnoted. Sources are given. You can feel more comfortable relying on them in research, as well as out-of-print publications. Build that analog part of your library as well as the digital part, with cases that you take seriously, or following, downloading, sharing information on. And if you're interested in investigating it in a more formal way, MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, the largest UFO organization in the world, for years has offered a training course and have a manual that is constantly being revised, and certainly a good basic tool for anyone serious about the subject. However, I would say your best tools in this research are going to be your good common sense, critical thinking, and what I call deductive reasoning, which is when you're confronted with a mystery, whether you're really on it yourself in the field, talking to witnesses, or trying to chase down whether or not an alleged case works for you, or you take it seriously, always begin by investigating the most mundane, boring, everyday possible explanation for the phenomena or the event. If that doesn't turn anything up, take one step up to the next most mundane explanation and continue to do that. If you do that properly, you may get to a point where you realize that no conventional explanation resolves or answers the question that you're looking into. And that's where the work really gets interesting for me. Granted, to do it that way rather than just start with the understanding that it's probably a UFO or paranormal, whatever it is, it's not as sexy. It takes a lot longer. It can be boring, but I think it's the best way to work.
And it's nice to talk to other people as well, get in touch with other people what's got more experience than you, to get some advice as well.
Yes, that's a very good point, Bob. I know many years ago when I was coming up through the work, I dared at certain points to reach out and write to researchers and writers who I had come to admire, either by reading their books or hearing them speak at conferences. And in almost every case I can remember, and I was a nobody, every one of them got back to me. This was all analog. This was all pre-internet, so it was in the form of letters or a note or something. But that can mean so much to somebody who is, trying to come up to that level or working to become a professional. That kind of encouragement is awesome. And I can say many years ago, before I was a published author or not very well known outside of my own little circle in ufology, I had written to and spoken with Stanton Friedman, who was very encouraging. Same thing with Timothy Good, who could not have been more supportive of the work that I was trying to do. And on down the line of often very well-known individuals in the field. I think if anybody thinks they're so important or so special or their work so unique that they can't be bothered to answer a inquiry or a fan letter, if you will, from somebody, then they really don't deserve the audience that they have. We are all in this together. And when I'm contacted by somebody who may be investigating their own case, or like our friend Paul Sinclair, who went from being an independent, on his own investigator who stumbled into an extraordinary series of mysteries and published his, now coming on to 2 books. I was happy to respond when he first contacted me as well. What you do comes back to you in this life, as we all know, and a little kindness doesn't hurt, and support for the right person at the right time can mean everything. But trust your instincts, do your homework, and you too could be living the glamorous life that I live.
Yes. Like you say,
yeah.
because I know somebody who's going into it now, but he's packed his job in. And I said to him, never, ever pack your work in. Exactly, that pays your bills. And if you don't do that and things fall flat, where are you going to be? You're going to have to sell your house. You're going to be in debt.
Yeah.
And I've tried to explain to him, but I keep getting on to him and talking to him to see if he sees sense.
Again, some people like me, when I first became involved, become so obsessed that it really does displace other areas of your life, which should not be neglected. And balance in all things when possible. Don't neglect everything else for the sake of the story or the adventure of getting the story.
It seems to have taken over his world. He's looking on the internet too much, reading too much into things, instead of sitting back a little bit and thinking about it.
Yeah. And boy, right now we are in the middle of so many, breaking cases that people are keeping their eyes on. The Peruvian mummies, the whole controversy about the so-called secret space program, what aspects of it that we envision may be authentic, which people that claim to have been a part of it may be legitimate, and there's always people looking to make a fast buck or fool other people. I think they are thankfully in the minority in our field, but they're there. And once again, your own personal vetting, finding out what you can. Does it verify the facts about the individual and their claims? Sometimes evidence is simply unavailable, but taking somebody's word for anything, period, is not the way to go, no matter how sincere they may seem in their allegations or what they allege.
How do you see the role of, well, we talked about witnesses, experiences, and UFO abductees, both within the ufology and the world at large?
Yeah. I think they're centrally important. Without witnesses and people who have had experiences, who have the courage to, at the least, write about them or share them with others, perhaps with investigators or with the aim of writing or getting the information on their memories out there. First, they are looking ridicule straight in the eye. Ha ha, you say you were taken by a flying saucer. That's very funny. Or any of the other possibilities that sound so science fiction-y to people who do not study this, and certainly to people to whom these kinds of things have not happened. I think for every abductee that comes forward, proves himself to be credible, and I include witnesses and experiences as well, prove themselves to be credible, are willing to discuss what has happened to them, it has the potential of helping others accept these things are real, and in the process begin to normalize, if that's the right word, for themselves, that they live in a world where, as the quote goes, not only is it impossible, how does it go? There's more to the universe there's not only more to the universe than we can grasp. I'll think of it another time.
It's
But
all right.
each one individual who gets out there in the world and makes themselves known, doesn't back down, ideally has credible evidence, and evidence exists certainly in the form of implants, x-rays, CAT scans, family histories, documentation from medical and mental health professionals, multiple witnesses, physiological changes to organic material that has been part of an experience they've had, soil, whatever. One more person may take the subject seriously. I also think if we cross that line at some point, whether we see it or not, where we do come to live in a world where, call it post-disclosure, if you will, these people, I think, will be centrally important in their communities in helping their friends, neighbors, co-workers adjust to what will likely be a very trying period of time. Let's remember that most folks don't talk about this stuff like we do. They hardly even think about it, if at all. And when you're at a conference or with like-minded people on this thing, there is the illusion that, we are really making a mark here, and there are a lot of us, and things will change. All true, but we represent still a relatively very small percentage, I believe, of people on Earth. And to just say, I'm pushing for disclosure, I want it to happen yesterday rather than tomorrow. If it blows up in your face, sorry if it freaks you out, but I'm ready. I think we need to weigh, if we could stage manage disclosure, how would we do it? Just to say, tell the folks everything, maybe a recipe for mass panic, mass depression, a certain amount of chaos, certainly problems in the economy. I don't see all of the necessary thought having been put into this yet, and I don't know the answer. I just feel that, all the world leaders getting on stage at the same moment, coordinating their television broadcasts and pulling out the jams, is going to be a very exciting, if anxiety-provoking, period for a bunch of us, but it's going to be a really scary and possibly chaotic period for many others.
There must be some cases when you first started out and thought, God, this is strange.
Yeah. Well, the first one I started with, of course, was my own and my sister's, mine in terms of the sighting we had, which was the strangest thing that had ever happened to me. And Helen's account, which I have to say, as a researcher who has had a long specialty in the abduction phenomena, in some cases is word for word or very near. Hundreds of accounts that I've heard or been privy to over the decades, but back then was nothing I ever had heard before. But yeah, those were the cases that I began with, I guess.
But there must be some really interesting cases, what you've worked on over the years and thought, by golly, that's been really, really interesting.
No question about it. And, a rush of ones come to my mind. First and foremost was one that walked into Bud Hopkins' life during the years that I worked as his assistant. And for any of your listeners who are not familiar with that name, Bud Hopkins was arguably the pioneer, the father of scientific abduction studies, as opposed to another specialty area within the UFO subject. And in early 1996, a woman named Linda Corteil, a New Yorker, wrote to Bud a letter that I read And then she came in November of, I guess it was, no, it was 89. I'm sorry, 1989. The investigation lasted 6 years and was completed in 1996. And Linda's case was ultimately written up as an extraordinary book, and even by the standards of modern UFO investigation, one without peer, called Witnessed, the True Story of the Brooklyn Bridge UFO Abductions. I think of the several, well, I don't even, it might have been more than several, but the thousands of letters that I read from people who felt they had had these kind of experiences, for Bud, marking them with the code relative to how significant they seemed and whether or not the little time that he had, some of it should be spent investigating this particular case. I'm reminded right now of a file that I have with the late Bud's permission. I was so touched by letters that he was receiving from children and adolescents and teenagers that at a certain point, I asked him if I could make file copies, being very careful to remove any and all information from these handwritten letters in my Xerox copies that could identify them. So in one sense, they're not very valuable for research on the person, because I have no idea who that person is and will never know. But I went over them fairly recently, Bob, and the poignancy of them and the similarities between them, they put me in a spot I find myself in, I guess, once or twice a year, at least, where I genuinely feel all over again for the 100 and whatever time, oh my God, this is really happening. This is really happening. This is not some psychological aberration or, somebody faking something or anything other than what it really seems to be. And I am shocked and amazed all over again that this is what we seem to be dealing with. In a way, I hope I never lose that ability to remain that way toward the subject. If I ever get so blasé or, casual about it, I shouldn't be in the work anymore, I think.
But that's good. That's absolutely good, Peter. But things like that happen. And have you ever sometime had missing time where things have gone? You've lost an hour or 2 hours.
Being me and doing this stuff professionally, I certainly think about that, but have to say, to the very best of my knowledge, I have never had a missing time episode, unless you want to count having passed out after or during my sister's and my sighting, which was quite overwhelming to me. But I have documented, heard, researched the missing time accounts of ever so many people, not just here in the UK, but all over the world. And Bud Hopkins' first book, which really woke people up in this research area, was called Missing Time. It was published in 1981. He is the man who created that phrase, although I'm sure people said missing time before it. But the same with the word gray. 20 odd years ago, it only was a shade between black and white. Now, I'm sure millions and millions of people who have no interest in the subject of UFOs, but are culturally aware, know that gray is a term applied to a certain type of being, non-human being. In that same sense, Bud gave us a new, important, very hyper-specific phrase in the English language. Missing time, for just about anybody that has any awareness of the subject, does not mean missing time in general. It applies to missing time in the ufological sense.
Jennifer's in the chat room. She says, what happens to these people when abducted?
Great question. Hundreds and hundreds of profiles that I've seen, and again, hundreds of cases that I've been involved in investigating in those years with Bud. It's never exactly the same, but more often than not, a person is taken, often from their bedroom at night. They are unable to resist. They are levitated off their bed. They are often floated through a solid surface, whether it's the wall of their home or a window or the roof. They are taken somewhere. In some cases, it's fair to assume it is a craft. In other cases, perhaps a location where the craft has brought them, where they often have memories of being examined on a metal table, sometimes having something inserted into them, a implant, as we would call it, a procedure performed on them. And then we feel very strongly, to whatever degree those other intelligences want you to remember or not remember, you are returned to the location from where you were taken, with partial memories, full memories, or no memory at the time.
Yeah, I know you speak to quite a few people. Do a lot of people remember being on the craft?
Yes.
Inside it?
Yes. Part of the mythology of naysayers and debunkers is that these poor, deluded, weak-minded people who feel that something like this might have happened fall into the clutches of evil, twisted, probably mentally ill researchers who, for some reason, believe such things happen, put these people under hypnosis, and then in hypnosis convince them that such things have happened. That would be funny if it wasn't so outrageous. I'm guessing with the rare exception here and there, but it is outrageous. And people overall, like my sister, remembered very clearly parts of the particular event that had happened under hypnosis with Bud and another highly qualified hypnotherapist. She remembered more, but not everything. That is often the case with people who have partial memories, who choose to go through regressive hypnosis and see if they can recover more memories or learn something more about the event. Other people who do seem to have had these kinds of things happen to them may at first experience a free-floating anxiety marked by otherwise kind of wild or absurd or mysterious phobias or fears, not wanting to be within a mile of a beautiful little picnic ground that you had a childhood event at, fills you with dread. The thought that you have seen a 3-foot white owl on your windowsill, and so on down a long list of screen memories or possibilities or things which represent a genuine trauma or memory below the surface. A number of those people felt there was a chance, and that's, everybody arrives at it in their own way, that they had had that kind of experience, that they seeked out Bud or somebody like him to investigate it deeper. And in the course of doing so, either found out that they really didn't have an attached memory, and that whatever they're anxious about is not UFO related, or in fact, that there is a memory there. And it's different from person to person in that sense.
I think when women have been abducted, I heard a case where a lady was pregnant at the time, taken out of her bed, put back in the bed later on, the baby had gone.
Yes. I almost don't have to preface this by saying this is one of the most disturbing, outrageous, frightening, fascinating, creepy aspects of this whole phenomena. And what you've said is absolutely the way it is. I've been involved in a number of investigations of this sort, met more women than you would believe who swear they have had these kind of experiences. And, we're in the third trimester, everything going well, had a history of abduction, and went to sleep one night and were pregnant, and the next morning were not. One or two extremely upset, confused, curious, but very shaken obstetricians approached Bud that I was aware of with women that he was dealing with at the time. This would have probably been in the 1990s, because they could neither shake the feeling that this had not been some kind of spontaneous loss of the baby, but that it had been taken. Also, what seems to be another of the more chilling and wild-sounding allegations about the phenomena is that sperm and ovum are taken, and that there are beings that are part us, part them, for whatever purposes they are being bred for. All of this, in a way, is kind of in the wings, where it will lead us, and if there will become a time when these other beings that are part us and part them make themselves known remains to be seen. There is allegations and I think some serious reasons to feel that some of them look human enough that they are here among us, and other ones who do not quite look visually human enough who are someplace else. That's the tip of the iceberg, and again, where it's all going, we can only guess.
There seem to be a lot of children growing up, quite young, 4 or 5 year olds, seem to have visits from alien beings.
Yeah. When this whole area of study opened up, I know in America, in UFO studies, probably in the later 70s, where Betty and Barney Hill's case from 1961 was the main one that anybody was taking seriously, but except for several fine books, it was overall just left to its own little corner of ufology. The smart money thought logically that if this happens to you, if you're taken by, other intelligences, alien beings, if you want to call them that, the chances are probably like getting hit by lightning. If it's happened to you, the chances are excellent it'll never happen again. What we now know from case studies, not from theoretics, is overwhelmingly they follow bloodlines. That if this has happened to you, it started happening, as you note, when you were quite young, possibly before you can remember, and continues to happen on and off through a good part of your lifetime. And if so, the likelihood is that it happened to one of your parents, at least, and that it may involve one or more of your children. A chilling prospect for many, but this seems to be the way that it is.
And it seems to be happening more and more these days in 2017.
Well, I'm not sure whether it's happening more and more, or whether or not more and more people over these years and decades are more and more willing to come forward and say that it has, because it's a sneaky statistic. We don't know the full sweep. We can only make educated guesses, but like people who care less and less about what other people think about UFOs and their feelings about them, I think maybe it is happening more and more, or maybe it is a reflection of more and more people's willingness to be public about it in some manner.
But, with children, it must be difficult for a child to say, oh, I've had a visit last night, and going to your parents and saying, look, I've seen this, I don't know what they call them, they keep coming most nights, and they'll say, oh, you've been dreaming, and it must be quite difficult for a young child to convince somebody.
It depends on the parents, and that's a fact, Bob. Um, if, again, this has happened to you or your spouse or your partner, and you do have children, and you've taken any time to learn about the subject and this pattern, you may, like it or not be surprised if, your child comes to you with something like this. And unless you, as the parent, are speaking out of your own anxiety, your own desire to protect the child, even though this won't do it, your own awkwardness around the subject, your own shock that your child has come to you and said this, and said something like you've just said of, oh, honey, it just seemed that way. You dreamt it. It might have looked like that, but it was something else. That doesn't really help. But I'm working with Bud in until he died, a great working relationship with Dr. John Mack of Harvard, who also looked into this, been privy to ever so many cases involving children. It's rough. It's rough. And in some cases, less so with understanding parents. There are more and more mental health professionals who take this subject seriously, which is great. To feel so shaken about this that you feel you need to counsel with somebody or see a therapist of some sort, good, whatever works for you. But there is more and more support out there for folks who allege they've had these things happen. And I hope we will see that trend continue. But needless to say, children are a very special case, and I wouldn't try to handle it completely yourself unless you really know what you're doing if you are in that place.
On the other hand, what do you like least about your work?
Oh, I guess where it becomes not about the work, but about the personalities in the work, who has, the wildest allegation, the backbiting that sometimes accompanies it, the occasional fights between researchers that are driven by ego, by an ability by a desire to want to be well-known and highly regarded. It's a time waster. It's something that exists in, a lot of areas of human endeavor, but that depresses me and bores me, and really overall is a waste of time. At the same time, occasionally one is attacked and for work that you do or try to do, and you can either choose to ignore it or not. Most important thing is get on with your work, do your best work, be true to yourself, be true to the facts, and be true to others.
Yeah, what do you like best about your work?
Well, no question about it. The people that it has allowed me to meet and in many cases make friends with. And when I'm really fortunate, an invitation to speak someplace I've never been, to get a window on another culture, to make friends with folks I would have never met otherwise. Every once in a while, to get what I feel is a better understanding of the subject at large, or draw a tighter bead on it, but that doesn't happen a lot. Real revelations for me are few and far between, where wild allegations come at you every day from, all over the internet and from the research community at large.
Do you still think you still learn every day about something to do with UFOs?
Oh, Bob, 100%. And if not, for me, definitely something I learn about people regarding the UFO phenomena. I think that's a given. It's not every day, to put it mildly, that I learn something new about the UFO phenomena or these other intelligences. In fact, it's rare. But human nature and the way that we react to this subject, the way that we embrace it or flee from it, our longing to have parts of it be true and our terror of having that parts of it are true. I think it's an endless area of fascination for me about us human beings and how we respond to a subject that could bring us all potentially so much closer together. But for so many people, and it's not their fault in that they've been conditioned since birth without a word being spoken really, that it's nonsense, that it's silly, that you're wasting your time looking at it, that it's for goofballs and cultists and true believers and science fiction people. We will struggle. I am as impressed by people's resistance to take the subject seriously sometimes as I am impressed by the reality of the phenomena itself.
Yeah, no, I know there's something gone on recently on Amazon. Can you just give us a bit of an insight about the historical news in the world of UFO books and publishing?
Well, I know what you're referring to, and that is an announcement that was made online last week on the website of a New York publisher called Cosmo. And very sadly, but with my understanding and certainly begrudging support, they announced that they are suspending the distribution and the printing of the book that I co-wrote, Left at East Gate. There have been so many allegations of untruth on the part of my co-author, Larry Warren, relative to the book and to events and aspects supporting the book, that our publisher has decided to look into it on their own. I've already seen, although I don't spend much time searching for information about it, posts that are blaming the publisher, that are blaming me, that are blaming secret forces within the government, etc., for this decision, when in fact it really has to do with a nonfiction book that is now proven to have to contain a certain amount of fiction. How much, I can't say, but Cosmo Press is looking into this, and I will read from the statement here. As an independent publisher, we look for the quality books in a wide range of genres, from public affairs and personal development to history, philosophy, and niche subjects such as ufology, and then make a determination whether these books fit well within our catalog. At this moment, we cannot be certain that Left at East Gate still meets this standard. Consequently, we have decided to suspend the distribution of this book until the situation surrounding it has been clarified to our satisfaction. And in this case, our satisfaction, I would interpret as meaning that our publisher, his staff, Cosmo's attorney, are now going through allegations, defending and coming at my co-author. And they will determine what they do, and the future of this book, or the lack of it, will then be made public.
Yeah, that's fine. That's okay. That's fine. Anyway, it's been so interesting having you back on the show after 3 years.
Well, a pleasure to be back, Bob, and let's make it not nearly so long next time.
Exactly, yeah. It's been lovely talking to you.
You too, my friend.
And I'm on my show on Friday. I've got John Teeter on my show on Friday. He's a really good guy as well. He's got books out as well. That'll be 3 o'clock Eastern time on Friday. We'll talk to you in a minute, Peter. Thank you to Jennifer being the producer of the show today. Thank you to everybody in the chat room as well. Good night and God bless. Thank you. Bye.